My name is Sacheen Littlefeather. I'm Apache. I'm representing Marlon Brando this evening.
She's actually an actress acting to the actors at the Oscars to break into Hollywood.
That he very regretfully cannot accept this very generous award.
There is no way that he would have sent her up there if he knew she was not Native American. No way. He would have never done that. She duped him. I went up to Sacheen and I said, I'm going to expose you for the mentally ill fraud and this fake Indian that you're portraying. This is wrong.
Welcome back to the Facts Verse podcast. My guest today is Rosalind Cruz. She is a Montana resident. She works on old cars. She works at Home Depot. She manages vacation rentals, all sorts of things like that. But we're not here to talk to her about that stuff today. We're here to talk to her about her sister, Sacheen Littlefeather, or as she always knew her, Marie Cruz. So please welcome Rosalind Cruz.
Hi. Hello, everybody out there.
Thank you so much for being here. This is a delight to be able to talk to you. I'll just very briefly, obviously we're here to talk to you, so I'll try to stay out of your way. But for those who, I would imagine some people who've clicked on this video are familiar with the story. But for those who aren't, very briefly, in 1973 at the Oscars, Marlon Brando, who was fairly sure he was going to win, or maybe not, I don't know, but basically decided, I'm not going to go to the Oscars. Instead, I'm going to have this woman who I understand to be a Native American activist and actor to accept my award on behalf of me, and to use that time to give a speech about the way Native Americans have been treated in Hollywood and elsewhere. And that happened. And he knew your sister and asked her to do it. She said yes. It caused a huge stir. It was a live moment on TV that became quite famous. And she became quite famous because of that, and spent the rest of her life as a Native American activist, actress, and model. And that was the story that kind of everybody knew for a long time. In 2022, the Academy actually sent a letter of apology to your sister and others to say, on behalf of Hollywood, we are sorry for the way that we've treated Native Americans in film and in culture, et cetera. And it was at that point that you and your other sister kind of said, all right, it's enough now. We need to be heard, and we need to tell the truth about our sister, the real story, what she's said over the years, and all things like that. So that's when you got involved. That's my very, very brief kind of like trying to get through it real quick so we can talk to you. So I guess I do want to talk about all the specifics of post 2022. But before we do that, will you take us way, way back to where and how you guys were all raised?
Well, we were all born and raised in Salinas, California. My parents were saddle makers. My mom was a stamper. My dad was a saddle maker. So they had our own business, young couple. Our grandparents lived right next door, being my mother's grandparents. So they helped raise us. And, families back then, they kind of integrated on working, growing together, raising kids, so forth like that. My father came from a lot of poverty, and his father was an alcoholic. And so he kind of went around to foster homes and things like that. His mother died when she was 24 years old. So that would have put him at 2. And at that point, my aunt was born. I don't know if she died complications of childbirth or what have you. So my Aunt Lucille was adopted out. We're not quite sure, maybe within the family. So we had a good childhood growing up. There's no poverty. My grandfather worked at the San Jose Mercury as a linotypist. So he traveled 1 hour to work and 1 hour back. And so he provided us with, we had 4-H, which is an agricultural community. We love that, sewing, cooking, gardening. We knew everybody else in the Salinas Valley, horses, riding. We were big in the Salinas, California rodeo. And so we had ballet, we had tap, he paid for Catholic school. So we had a good upbringing, just middle class, and, nothing outrageous. My dad, he did lose his hearing, I think at about 14 years old, to meningitis. So he he was born in 1922. So there was a lot of types of, polio, meningitis, things that were going on where they really didn't have penicillin and things quite corrected. He also got cancer as a young man, so that would put him at his late 30s. And then he died in 1966 at 44 years old. So you have no chemo. You don't have the technology you have today. So anybody back then would go through a lot of pain and suffering. And usually they just kind of gave you surgeries and removed things. And it was a slow, agonizing death until he lapsed into a coma, and we were all there except for Marie, who's Sacheen. She refused to be there when we were all present when he took his last breath.
So, that the reason I even started with that, obviously, just to get a sense of you and your family, because even, as the story of Sacheen developed, very famously, she created she told a very different story of what her supposed upbringing was, which obviously would have included you guys. And I know it sounded like she maybe adopted some of the aspects of your father's father in terms of alcoholism and growing up in poverty, and sort of said, well, that's just going to be the story I tell people about how I grew up. And so, and I know from reading what you have officially put out, like I knew that was part of it. So I wanted to get into that right away. Were you the youngest?
Yeah, I'm the youngest. My middle sister's named Trudy. They're her, Sacheen character. They're like 3 years different. Trudy and I have 7 years, and my oldest sister, Sacheen, and I have 11. But one of the factors that people don't realize is that she is a paranoid schizophrenic. And her symptoms started at 12. So here again, we have a period of no medication, really, no family therapy.
Sure.
They don't really know much. They didn't even know anything about, and she was also bipolar with that. So, we don't have any tools as a family. And she starts acting out, I remember violent and psychotic episodes where she would attack my sister or screaming, yelling. You just look at somebody like that and you don't know how to process it. What are you supposed to do? We didn't have any tools back then. So as we understand it today, the longer you go without treatment, the worse it gets. And that's what happened in her particular case. She absolutely hated my father. And I think a lot of it had to do with maybe we didn't have what the guy in downtown Salinas did, because we were pretty much like 12, 13 miles out of town. So a lot of the friends that we went to, maybe they had nicer homes or nicer cars. I thought our life was fine. But I think she was the type of person I always want to kind of keep up with the Joneses. I think she was really ashamed of my father. And in fact, after he did die, she told my middle sister, Trudy, that she was glad he died. That's pretty horrific. That's her.
And that's, that's early. That I feel like, I don't know the exact numbers, but as I understand it, having these kinds of having paranoid schizophrenia, like it is often something that it comes on and is discovered at least in people's 20s, 30s and on. And to have behavioral, issues that early, I would imagine was obviously so jarring for everybody. So did it have like ups and downs? Were there times like, when she was between, let's say 12 and 21 or whenever, where you're like, oh, maybe she's getting better? Or was this kind of a steady curve of like, this is abnormal behavior?
Abnormal, didn't understand it, got worse. Her behavior became more erratic. So, we're dealing with a family member that is off. So we don't understand what's going on. Although I know that she just hated being Mexican, because my mother is German and Dutch, basically more Dutch. And my father is Mexican and Hispanic going back to Spain. And our cousin Richard Manriquez, he's who I met through ancestry. Our DNA matches up through our father's grandmother's side. He's taken us back to the 14th century. So basically, we're like 69% European along with dad, and 31% basically Hispanic. So for those of these people who are out there trying to make her a Mexican Indian, that's like her worst nightmare. But with that going, she's trying to find a different personality. I think that because of her narcissistic personality, which is to me is just a bad seed. There's a lot of people out there that are plain Indian. They're narcissistic, pathological liars. There's no pill. There's no medication. To me, they're just bad seeds, and they're a menace to society, especially for the tribal nations out there. So with her, it was trying to find an identity. The one thing that I can say that she had a gold for that I felt very proud of was that she wanted to be a school teacher. And I think that she would have made a wonderful school teacher. But from that, she decided she wanted to model. Well, she was beautiful, and, we were proud of that. At that, I think she kind of went into this go-girl, like Annette Funicello, with the big hair and so she kind of went into that phase. And then you have the change in society in the 60s where everybody kind of merged to the hippie side. But you had the Vietnam War protests. So you had a lot of civil rights, and the society was changing as a whole. So it wasn't just her. It was everyone making that shift. And at that point, she started to become a little bit of an activist in what was going on in society. So now she's in the Bay Area, up in that territory. Somewhere when she was, I believe, 19, she was going to San Jose State University. She never finished anything she did. That's part of her condition. She had a psychotic episode, and she tried to attack one of her female roommates with a butcher knife. So they kind of wrapped her up, and they took her to a local hospital, to a mental ward. And then they went ahead and advised my mom and my grandparents at that time that to go to Agnew State Hospital, which is in Santa Clara. It's no longer open, but it looks like this huge Victorian type castle, the classic image of the madhouse. And they did call it, because it was built in the 1800s, they did call it one time the Great Insane Asylum. So she checked herself in there, and that was in July of 1969. I know that for a fact because I found a letter that was written to them saying, "We have your daughter, Sacheen Cruz." She started to make that metamorphosis around that time. We had
interesting. That's how she had. Okay, so she had picked the first name by 1969, but not the last name. As part of sort of figuring out which identity. It's fascinating too, because like you talked about, it's, a really good point about there were so many people trying to figure out who they were in that era, what they stood for, what they wanted to fight for, or fight against. And there was probably for the first time, an availability in society to say, yeah, you can reinvent yourself. You can figure out what you want. There's more news going around. There's movements. So that was something that was common to all people, especially young people back then. But then when you combine that with somebody who already has pre-existing pretty severe mental issues, then you can get somebody who invents a character, as you kind of say, that isn't based on reality and is just now like, okay, here's my background, which again, also kind of like, maybe that's okay if you're kind of like, oh, people go to college and they say, my name is this now or whatever, it's like, there are harmless versions of that, I suppose. But it sounds like, for her, this was a conscious shift to go like, all right, I'm reinventing myself. I'm going to come with a backstory. I have I have already ongoing mental issues. So therefore it's going to be, looking from now, it was going to be hard for her to extract herself from that kind of thinking.
Correct. Buffy St. Marie did the same thing. What worked for both of them is that along with this change in society came the American Indian movement. And in the Bay Area at that time, they had taking control of Alcatraz. The woman who really should be the icon on that is Lynetta Warjack, who took role the entire time and was there. So that occupation took effect in November of 1969. Then it went on for 19 months. So what's really interesting is that throughout the 50 years when my sister has lived on her 15 minutes of fame, on Brando's coattails, none of these journalists do any research. If she talks about her whole entire career or life being the Sacheen Littlefeather person, and you can see in her interview she does. I was in a mental hospital for a year, and she makes it so dramatic. Put the timeline together. If you check in July of 1969 and you're there for a year and you come out, guess what? Alcatraz is pretty much wrapped up. And she tried to make it clear.
The point being, she wasn't
there.
really like a part of that. Yeah.
She was never there. She was on Thorazine. They did that with people who had mental problems. Right. They didn't really know what to do with them. They just overdrive. Thorazine is an extremely strong narcotic. So when we went to see her, she was pretty much catatonic and her mouth was drying, and it was just a terrible situation. So prior to her going through this huge, probably the worst psychotic episode, we went on a family vacation, all the Indian reservations. And we found it very tragic how they lived and a little bit of their history and all that. I kind of think that planted a seed in her head about victimhood. So now you go to Agnew Mental Hospital and you get to metamorphosize this image. And then you come out and you've got this huge society revolution going on. And now you've got the American Indian movement taking place, and they're saying, we want our voice heard too. Okay, I get that. Real easy for her and Buffy to fall into that because they can play the part of Indian. Buffy pulled it off too for 60 years. Nobody ever checked these people for their lies. So shame on the media for their fake news.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. What pops in my head is like, back up nowadays, obviously everyone is trying to poke holes in everybody else's stories. Right. So it's a lot harder to do that now. Back then, I just feel like, unless people were doing this all over the place and it just never got found out, it feels like, not to say the media was, didn't do their job or maybe no one had reason to suspect that people might do this kind of thing. It just seems until people start doing it and you find out like, oh, people are just making up their backstory, if you're a media person and you see her on TV doing the Oscars and then, it may never even occur to you like, oh, I should go back and literally fact check the most basic biography. Of course, nowadays everybody would. And so because of that, she clearly was able to just no questions asked, change this whole persona that had no basis in fact.
Correct. And everybody who was, speaking out on different issues, no one checked them because it was a time and a period where voices needed to be heard. So if somebody spoke up for a cause or a group of people, they didn't check their background. That's just the way it was. That's how her and Buffy got away with it. Buffy, I can say, does have talent. However, she got paid more by finding out that if can play Cree or Indian, you get paid more money. My sister, on the other hand, Marlon Brando, he was active in the Black Panthers, and then he was very active with Wounded Knee and some of the key players who were Dennis Banks and Russell Means. So when this all happened, because he's dealing with real tribal citizens. These people have tribal cards or they're strong descendants of people. There is no way that he would have sent her up there if he knew she was not Native American. No way. Because he was dealing with some very strong people who were in the thrones of some heavy situations. And, there was a really violent situation that took place at Wounded Knee at that time, which is part of the little speech. But he would have never done that. She duped him. And when he figure that out, then he just cut off all communication. So, this whole big thing of, I was blacklisted because I did that and it ruined my career. Well, no, that never happened. What happened was, as she predicted or wanted, her film career picked up. So now you've got her, and if anyone was smart enough, they would really watch her movies, because she's a Native American woman who's getting gang raped by cowboys. One of them, I don't remember, it was Billy Jack. I saw it. It was so disgusting, where she's getting her clothes ripped off. It was so violent that I couldn't deal with it. I think they have it on porn sites today, for people who like that kind of thing. But I know my grandparents went to the show. She's saying, well, I'm in this movie, see it. And when one of these rape scenes came up, they just got up and left. And I don't blame them. It was disgusting. In fact, some of my friends, after this whole thing came to head, they looked it up, and we said, wow, we saw those movies. They said pretty bad. So now you've got an activist who's really an opportunist, because a true Native American woman would never disgrace herself or her tribe by doing something terrible like that, because they, out here in Montana,
I was trying to figure out where the role was going. Yeah, because for some reason, an actor, a role is a role, and you play lots. You might play a terrible person, but that's a really fascinating thing. That there's like a pride thing. Yeah. But for real Native Americans, you're saying wouldn't take those kinds of roles.
Wouldn't. They don't want to be seen as sex symbols because they've been violated. Today out here in Montana, which I became aware of, and by, talking with Jacqueline Keeler and all these other people that have kind of taken me under their wing, we have a huge problem with murdered, missing Indigenous women. It is a very big problem where these gals go missing, they're trafficking, they just disappear. And even at that time, that is something that Native American, they don't want to be seen as sex objects. And it has a lot to do with their history, the government moving them, killing them, raping them, all that type of stuff. And then she turns around and poses for Playboy. And a lot of people who were tribal citizens, especially the women, that was a big red flag for them, even back then. So, but see, now you've got Brando. Brando is the foundation for this all. He's a strange man, but he's a great actor. I believe he had the right motive. I don't think it should have been taken to an award show. I think he could have found another way to do that, because award shows now are nothing but political statements. I truly believe in the depths of my soul, because of that act that they did has ruined it to the extent that it is now. I feel that was a catalyst.
Yeah.
That whole thing, that whole message that Brando wanted to get across, what was good. But then you have somebody who's Brando saying, I don't like the way Hollywood's portraying and stereotyping Native Americans, and white people shouldn't play Native Americans, but Native Americans should play themselves. Well, she comes up in a plain buckskin dress. Every tribe has a different set. Says, oh, I'm Apache, which is a lie, but she's actually an actress acting to the actors at the Oscars to break into Hollywood. Sums it up. And nothing's changed. So when I come along, or our family did after she died, because nobody would listen to us except I found Jacqueline Keeler, all of a sudden it hits the head and people started listening and going, what? They said, yeah, we're not Native here. So then that's when the Academy comes in. And that's when I saw your video said Littlefeather duped Hollywood. Well, the Academy, who knows how much money they put out on this, what I call flop apology. All of a sudden they find this out after she dies. And now the Native Americans are going, okay, this is your chance to make things right. What are you going to do? Right. And then you've got Heather Ray, Bird Running Water, who are on this alliance team. in the academy. Part of that's Jacqueline Stewart, total idiot, who was the president of the museum at that time. They came back with, we recognize self-identify. So if you want to identify as Cree, Native, Navajo, hey, we're going to go for it. That's everything that Brando said. Hollywood, you shouldn't do that. So really,
Right.
Nothing changed.
And it's also, there is, the idea of creating an identity and, how one feels about themselves and how they see themselves and whatever. And then creating an actual character with a fake backstory and all that seems to be like a different thing, even if you're going to be saying like, oh, I embrace the notion of people can sort of feel how they feel and want to change who they are in one way or another. She was just playing a role. And so I wonder, so after she got out of the mental institution, and she was sort of now turning into this character. Was the family in touch with her at that point? Were you guys trying to be like, hey, this is not you. What are you doing? Or was it like she was kind of gone?
The way we looked at it was, look, if you want to play Indian, if you want to go to powwows and meditate and take sweats, if this keeps you emotionally stable, or you can get something out of this that will keep you mentally functional, go for it.
It's a coping mechanism. Sure. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It was a coping mechanism for the whole family. Right. We just thought, well, here she goes again, in some wild image, but it sticked and it took off and she got people to believe it. And what I find is interesting, like with Buffy St. Marie and my sister, is that the more they lie and nobody fact checks them, nobody says, hey, wait a minute, something's not right here. They feel invincible. Then they can just say anything they want to say, and then people just believe it. And if you say the same lie over and over and over and maybe throw some more victim stories, then they get to throw the real big stuff in. Well, let me add to this as a bigger victim. And people just eat it up. I mean, I think that's the nature of men, to be just a certain amount of people are just really clueless. And then there are some people who are going to believe that my sister, no matter what, she is Indian and we're denying our heritage. That percentage has really shrank in the last 4 years. But the injustice really is to the tribal nation. So, I also feel sorry for these people that have named their girls, or even I've seen a few white people that have taken on my sister's name. She got that name because there's a ribbon company named Sacheen Ribbon Company, but it's Sasheen. And we used it because we sewed our own clothes, and we also sewed and modeled for 4-H. So she always liked that name. And my sister, during all this, Trudy says to me, I know how she got her name. I had an epiphany. And I said, how? She goes, the ribbon we used to use. She just changed the spelling. So now you've got all these people out there, these kids, and her name's Sacheen. They're named after a ribbon company that was actually made by 3M in the same year that she was born. And now you can buy it on eBay, vintage. Right. Yeah.
Wow.
That's not an Indian name.
And then Littlefeather, where did that come from?
I have no idea. I think that, she probably pulled it from somebody that she met. Yeah. I have no idea.
So then when you guys, so obviously the family was, as you said, treating it as a bit of okay, well, if this can help her, function, okay. But then obviously it snowballed. And now you have this famous sister who's playing this character made up. At that point, was anybody trying to sort of talk her down and say like, hey, this is not cool, or this could be dangerous, or we're worried about you? Or was it now at that point really too far gone?
What really happened here was, Brando cut her off. she continued to create friends, go to powwows. We weren't really too concerned about it. We just saw her playing Indiana, going to powwows and sweats and doing this. And then she had these friends that came over. And of course, they're tribal citizens. And of course, they're, dressed up native and all that. And we knew that every year that somehow somebody would interview her for that 15 minutes of fame, right? We didn't really think much about it. But what happened as a family, this behavior of hers separated all of us. We'd have to take a break from her for maybe we wouldn't talk to her for 6 months either. This sister wouldn't be talking to her. I wouldn't be talking to her because at one point she tried to stab me with a butcher knife when I was asleep on her couch for some incredible weird thing that she was trying to control me over. And I woke up and she's just like this. And I remember grabbing her wrist and saying, "Drop it." And then I got off of the couch and I grabbed her throat and I shoved her up against the wall. And I literally wanted to kill her. And, I had to catch myself and say, stop. It's just a decades long of dealing with somebody with mental illness. And excuse us, we're human. But what really happened was that when my mom got older, that we had to move her out of her house. And a lot of people go through this. It's very painful, the elders have to leave their home. Maybe their husbands die. Well, anyway, mom moved in with me and I lived in the Bay Area. So I'm near Sacheen. I'm near my other sister. So we all start to take care of her. And I had a full-time job. I was trying to work that and take care of mom. And at some point, I lived on my savings for a while and rented a house for my middle sister, Trudy. Well, what was happening was Sacheen was trying to take over on everything. And that's what she does. And she created a wedge between my middle sister and I. That's what she does. She creates wedges between people so that she can take control of things. She's a pathological liar. She's a manipulator and she's narcissistic and her agenda's first. So what had happened in this particular case, I had to move out of that house. There was a lot of misunderstandings and lies, creating a wedge between my middle sister and I. And she takes my mom and pulls her with her to live. Well, one thing I need to note with this paranoid schizophrenia and getting out of the mental institution, she had a boyfriend way back then that she said, "Be my conservator so I can be on federal disability." And she went through the steps. They go through administrative law judge, and she acted crazy and had different color socks on. It was another act. It was another persona so she could get this money. My sister never worked a day in her life. She was off federal disability. She was off, food stamps. She was getting Section 8 housing. She was a professional patient, into the system. She was always chronically ill because that's how she got attention. But my mother to her was a point of, I can get more money out of her. She moves in with me, then I can apply for Section 8 for 2 people, right? I can get her Social Security money, right? That was part of it. That stopped, and I put a stop to it. My middle sister controlled those funds. But what happened too, my mom had some extra money because a person in Salinas ran through her house. I think she got $7,000-8,000. Guess who took that money? Yeah, my older sister, and bought herself a car. And at that point, I was still my mother's in-home healthcare person. And I said, oh, no, this has got to stop here. One day we get a letter, or my sister does, and says, hey, your in-home healthcare worker, who's your boyfriend, Chuck, his name's Charles. He's our in-home healthcare worker, but it was a money scam because he had a full-time job working at LensCrafters. But prior to all of that, he had been in state prison for manslaughter for beating up some guy. And then he actually told my middle sister, Trudy, that, look, I need to tell you the truth here because we're being turned in for elder abuse by me, that I am a registered sex offender. You can look him up online. Charles
Oh,
Johnson,
wow.
Rich. And we take it even further. We find out that he sexually abused his stepdaughter. And it'll say on there on the computer, on the website, a child underneath the age of 14. We always thought the guy was creepy. I mean, he just kind of looked at you and he looked at you up and down. My mom didn't like him. I didn't like him. My middle sister didn't like him. We thought he was a creep. And
Wow.
a Charles sister who is tribal, thinking back, I liked her. Her name was Charlene because they're from the Oto tribe in Oklahoma. She did not like my sister. I understand why now, because she was a
I would
fraud.
imagine.
Yeah, she was a fraud. So what happened in that, I told Sacheen, I said, look, Chuck's got to move here. You got a letter from social services, says he has a felony. We've got to give mom the best years of her life. She's old. I said, and she's like, yes, yes, yes. And she kept pushing me off. I said, if you don't get him out of here, I'm going to turn you in. And I did. And it turned into a huge mess. So what she did to get back at me, she committed elder abuse by not allowing my mom to speak to me, by not answering the door. I mean, it went through a lot of legal procedures and trying to get a lawyer to get my mom to get her out of that situation. And so now here's Sacheen having these psychotic episodes, throwing things at my mom. When I was able to talk to her, she said, my mom would say, oh, Sacheen had another one of her fits. Oh, she's left me alone for hours. It was tragic what she did to her. Just absolutely terrible. And Chuck never left either. I mean, the whole thing was insane. And at one point, she tried to file a restraining order against me that was completely fabricated. And we went to court, and I had to testify what she was doing. And the judge said, what's wrong with you? He told us, Sacheen, he goes, I have every right to see my mom. And he said, is this letter correct to your paranoid schizophrenic that I brought? And she didn't want to answer anything. The thing was, I said, look, when I call my mom, she hears my voice. She picks up the phone on the answering system. Right after that, she turned down the voice on the answering machine. So when I called in, my mom couldn't hear me. And my mom had already had dementia at that time. I mean, It was isolation, emotional, verbal, elder abuse. That's my story.
Wow.
See, Heidi St. Marie, there was a CDC documentary where they went and interviewed Heidi St. Marie. And she says, oh, yeah. Heidi told my father, her brother, if you try to expose me, I'm going to say you raped me. I'm going to come after you, and I'm going to tell your wife and your employer that you sexually assaulted me as a child. I will go after you and you ruin your life, right? And Heidi had to share this, but she had all the letters. I have all these legal documents. I never got to tell my story because it like broke the ice with everything, where people were saying, oh, she's not Native American. And then it became a big fight between people. What happened here was that our family drama, the tribal nation got drug into our family drama. We've been dealing and cleaning up her messes for years. This is nothing new. This is on a national scale.
Yeah. Right. Well, that's, it's interesting and why it's a fascinating split between, the national story of your sister and the personal story, which is that, you might expect if it was just a case of cut and dry, you guys kind of had a normal, family life, and you maybe weren't in touch with her, but she was off doing her thing and you knew the truth and she was not playing this character and whatever. But obviously for you and for your mother and your sister and everybody involved, like, the dealing with her was really not at all about the character and the, the publicity and the culture. It was like she was a mentally ill, essentially criminal who was making your life and your family's life really, really hard. And so for you, it's like, who cares about, I would imagine, I mean, I'm sure you obviously are empathetic to the tribal nations when it comes to that stuff, but for you, it was like ultra personal. Yeah. But yeah. So through the years then, were you like, as this was going on, did it ever occur to you? I mean, I'm sure you were just kind of trying to, obviously you were fighting this legally and then fighting it privately and trying to deal with this. At that point, were you like, I gotta get this out into the media, to the press to help me? Or was that sort of still far off?
No, that wasn't even, see, you have to understand, Sacheen Littlefeather is a character. Okay. That's a character that she plays when the camera's on, the powwows are going, the Brando thing. We're not enmeshed in any of that. We're dealing with this person that is mentally unstable. Now she's got mom. That was my battle with her for 3 years, to the point where, ironically, one day I went to ER. There was a gal that, I don't know, I found her. I just happened to run across her. She was overdosing. And so we called the ambulance, couple of us, and they picked her up and they took her to Marin County General Hospital. So I just happened to show up 4 hours later, and I recognized my sister's car. I went in there and I saw my mom, and my other sister was there. And she, she was all beat up in a fetal position in ER.
Oh, God. Wow.
And I went in and I go, Mama, it's me. And she calls me Rosie. She goes, Rosie? And I said, yes. I said, God sent me. She goes, I knew he would. And my other sister had walked out of the room, Trudy, and I went up to Sacheen and I said, this is a spiritual death. This is a violation of the universe. This is a murder. And I said, and it's the last thing I do. I said, I'm going to expose you for the mentally ill fraud and this fake Indian that you're portraying. This is wrong. And she just looked at me and you could just see her melting. I said, may God have mercy on your soul. So Mom, after that point, I stayed with her. We were separated 3 years through the hand of Sacheen and Chuck, who didn't answer the door, who defied the police. The police back then weren't very good on elder abuse. And Mom died 3 weeks later. Sacheen stopped me from going to the funeral. She told my middle sister that I didn't want to come, when I had cut off all communication with her when this first started in 2006. I was trying to expose her to social services and the police and things like that. I hadn't taken it to this level. So when my mother died, I didn't get to go to the funeral. I didn't get to go to the rosary. That was all Sacheen's making, because she hated me, because I turned her in and I threatened her to life and I jeopardized her scam. She was scamming the state of California. Right. She signed herself up as an in-home health care person to, I don't know, two people or too many. I don't know. She was collecting all sorts of money. Let's just put it that way. Using people's social security numbers. Yeah. I mean, she was a scammer. She knew the system and she worked it well. And she also worked a lot of people well because she duped people, including Hollywood. So when Mom died, I just let it go. I just said, I don't want anything to do with her anyway. That was the only bond, was trying to get my mom away from her, like anybody would. And the majority of elder abuse it takes on today is family, is the high percentage rate. And then you've got nursing homes. So,
and to really quickly back up, when you went in and you saw that your mother was physically hurt, was it obviously? It sounds like it was your immediate assumption that Sacheen had literally done this. Is that accurate?
Correct. I know that for a fact, because my other sister was running her own business. She didn't have time for that. My mother was so bent over like this, she couldn't even pick her head up. It was terrifying. Not only that, my sister had driven her insane to a point I have never seen in my life. And that is not an understatement. In fact, when I was in the hospital visiting her and I would take a couple steps back, she goes, oh, don't fall back that way. You're going to fall off this giant cliff. And she'd say, so and then we tried to get her up out of the hospital bed to walk. And she couldn't walk because my sister had left her for hours and hours And when I was taking care of my mom, she goes, Sacheen will leave me alone for hours and hours. And my sister was a shopaholic. So her whole apartment was like a tweakerville. You just had these little places. Well, when you got an elder who has dementia, their sight's not that good, their hearing's not that good. And when she had some Parkinson's, they shuffle their feet. So you have to have an open area to take care of them. My sister abused her. That's what this is all about. So now I leave California, I moved to Montana, and I'm thinking this whole thing's in God's hands. I wanted it to happen then. I have no idea that now that she's taking this to a whole different level. She tried to find out after that happened where I was working, to try to keep a control or some kind of tab on me, but she couldn't. So now I'm moving in Montana and I'm living here. My roommate says to me, after a year later, I said, yeah, this is my sister, what have you. He says, well, I grew up with tribal people all my life because I live on the reservation out here in Montana. I live on the Salish Kootenai Ponderay Reservation. I've got tribal people all around me. In fact, we and two others are the only white people that have land that's not tribal. If I walk 500 feet over here, I'm on the res. They want their land back. I probably could go to the tribe and say, buy my house, and they'd buy it. But, with that said, he said, well, why don't you apply to the tribe? I go, apply to the tribe? What are you talking about? So he explains it to me, and I said, well, I don't know. I guess, she's supposed to say that we're White Mountain Apache and that she's got Yaqui thrown out there. I wouldn't even know where to begin. So he starts telling me, well, this is what they do, because he's grown up with them all his life, but he's white. So I go to, I get a hold of this gal by the name of Leanne Mello at White Mountain Apache and says, I'd like to apply, blah, 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 who you're related to. And so we go through this months of her trying to figure out if there's something there. There's nothing. There's absolutely nothing. I went on the internet to search if there was something. There was absolutely nothing. Now, this started in November of 2021. Now we go into February of 2022, and she says there's nothing there, period. I'm like, okay, thank you.
So wait, you were doing that, was this sort of, obviously you knew your heritage growing up, but was it sort of at this point going maybe I should just triple check to make sure we don't really randomly have this heritage? Yeah. So you just wanted it before you were publicly saying this is not true. You said, might as well cover my bases and really make sure.
Right. Only because my roommate had brought it up to me and he says, do you know if you're tribal that you are entitled to certain benefits? I go, really? I didn't know that.
Interesting.
That's the reason I did it. That's the reason
gotcha.
I did it. And that's the reason a lot of people will do it and they lie and say they're tribal. On the other hand, after listening to my sister for decades, thought, is there something here that I don't know? But I couldn't find anything on her that said what tribe. And I said, I'm going to take this to the next level. Well, White Mountain Apache had never heard of her. And I sent him a picture of her. I go, Leanne Mallow, don't know anything about her. They said, okay. So my sister's alive then. Now, all this time, we got 8 more months now. And I kept looking her up on the internet because she has breast cancer, wondering when she was going to die. Sorry, people. I don't like her. She's a very sick, evil person. She needed to go. And my sister is somebody that she was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2011. We ironically happened to have the same practitioner, Sherry Forrester, who I can't stand, for good reason. My sister and I weren't talking, but at that time, Dr. Forrester says, I want you to have a breast exam. I said, why? She goes, because your sister's got breast cancer. I said, really? What stage? 4, maybe, and she said, well, you two still not talking? And I said, no. She goes, well, then I can't tell you anything more about your condition. I said, you're not making any sense here. So anyway, I knew my sister. I said, I know her. She's going to drag this out for about 10 years until she drops dead, most likely. And she did. She died in 2022. So I put her right on track. So as things go on, I had heard something on the internet where they were going to give her this big apology, you know, because now she's created the saint. See, I don't know. I don't really check in with her. I wash my hands of her when I left California. And now I read where they're going to give her this big apology because her career was ruined. I'm like, oh my goodness. You know, I was out of the picture. So she wasn't worried about me anymore. And my other sister, Trudy, she cut her off 2 years before because she was creating this enigma, this saint, this someone who sacrificed herself for Native Americans. We had absolutely no idea what was going on. Absolutely nothing. And so, you know, with that said, then my girlfriend, Teresa, came over here, texts me and says, oh, I'm sorry. You know, I heard on the news that your sister died. I'm thinking to myself, she texted me. I'm like, really? So I get on the internet and I read where she had died in Nevada at home, blah, blah, blah. And then it says, and her niece, Kalina Lawrence. I'm like, what? Who's Kalina Lawrence? So Kalina Lawrence is this Native American woman that my sister had signed up, I believe, for in-home health care, and she was getting money. Some other woman was there, I think, that signed herself up for it. And this girl is going around saying she's her niece. Well, yeah, I know in the tribal nation, they'll adopt people as they're my auntie and all that, but we're not American Indian, okay?
Right.
We don't have nieces. We don't have nephews. And you are misleading by telling the public here that you're our niece. That just really did it for me. And then I start reading the stories. My dad was an alcoholic. My parents were mentally ill. You know, my grandparents were terrible. I was born in poverty. We didn't have a toilet. And I go, enough. I'm just livid. Then I talked to my other sister. We hadn't talked in 13 years because of her. This is what she does. This is how the family has worked. See, this is how it's worked. It's right. Like an accordion. Speak, don't speak, speak, don't speak, because you got a mentally ill person. And all these people who pretend right. to be Indian, they're all narcissistic, pathological liars. They will never change. They're bad seeds in the world. And when you expose them, they just double down. But with that said, then I'm on social media bouncing around. So now I'm on X, back then Twitter, and I'm seeing, oh, she should be blessed and thank you. And I'm like, oh God, if they only really knew what this woman was about. The Sacheen Littlefeather is a fraud. She's a fake. She's not real. And so I see Jacqueline Keeler, and she's talking about pretendians and how this Littlefeather is not a true Native American. And I'm looking at what she's writing.
And she's Navajo, right? She's like,
yeah, she's Navajo. She's Navajo. She's,
and I think she is, and has a focus on Native American, you know, journalism, and is a very respected journalist in that field. Especially.
Correct. Yeah, she got a lot of pushback, you know, because it's coming full circle. But I said, somebody that would believe me, say, this is where we're at. We've been trying to expose my sister since 2006. You know, I got to figure I'm a lot younger. And my brother-in-law and my sister as well, trying to tell people. But you've got journalists that don't want to listen because she's worked so hard on creating this character like sure. Buffy did, that who's going to listen? This thing is already established. The Academy is eating it. You know, they've got their little awards or plaques or exhibits in there. You know, who's going to say, oh, gee, whatever Marlon Brando said, we're not going to listen to it now. So I got a hold of Jacqueline. Boy, it was difficult. And I thought, who is she connected to? So I just reached out to somebody who was connected to her. And I said, look, I'm her younger sister. She has another one. And this woman, her name is Sally, and she's Cherokee. you got a lot of crazy people in the world. So when somebody like this, who everybody thinks is a saint and famous, they could think I'm just somebody that's coming along trying to capture on this moment, right? But I wasn't. I was trying to reveal the truth. By the grace of God, Sally, I love her. We still talk today. We're friends. She believed me. And I asked her, I said, why did you trust yourself? She goes, I went on my intuition and I knew, Rosalind, I knew you were telling me the truth. Took 4 days to get a hold of Jacqueline Keeler. She was up at some cabin in Wyoming or something like that. And then Jacqueline, I finally talked with her. I was the one sister that she didn't know existed. She knew my other sister, and she had done tons and tons of research on our whole family. And she interviewed me on the phone for about 3 hours. And then she called my sister Trudy and interviewed her for so many hours. See, she was in the midst of writing this article for the San Francisco Chronicle. Well, once we came into the picture, it changed the dynamics. So then her editor, Matt, at the San Francisco Chronicle was like, whoa, 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 whoa. So we had to get birth certificates. We had to give identity. We had to prove who we were. And their legal team worked on it because this was big stuff. So now we're getting down to the funeral. My sister Trudy says, I found out through a priest because she missed the rosary because all these people, including this Kalina Lawrence, by the way, who put herself on my sister's death certificate as her niece. We've had that changed legally. Oh, yeah, because we hold the will. Because Sacheen gave my middle sister full control of a will before all this mess started back in 2007. So Trudy missed the rosary. They were going to hold her out or hold us away from the funeral by keeping it a secret. Well, Trudy found out through a priest where the funeral was going to be. And she says to me, I'm going to go to the funeral. I said, why? She goes, because I want to irritate people. I go, how can you irritate people? They don't even know we exist. And I said, I'm coming out from Montana. She goes, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to crash the funeral. It's supposed to be on YouTube, isn't it? She said, yes. I said, well, great. Everybody in YouTube is watching it around the world. They're going to watch me get up there and say hello, which I did. It was very nice. I said, I come here in honor of our parents, my father's good name. We were good people. My sister had mental problems. We come in peace, but we exist here. In the meantime, you've got Kalina Lawrence running around taking condolences, who's not even related to us. We're sitting here in the church. Nobody knows who we are. I mean, do you know how insulting that is? In the meantime,
did people react to that when you stood
they
up and
didn't
said
even
that?
know who we were.
So after you had spoken, was it like, were people kind of like, I don't know what to think here?
I don't know. When I got up there and said who I was, and then I had another sister who was sitting there, everybody's face just went blank. I mean, this is not, see, the whole funeral was supposed to be, she's a saint going out, she's dying,
right?
Blah, blah, blah. I like badgered Jacqueline Keeler. I said, you're going to go to this funeral with us. I said, get Matt to pay for you. I don't care. You've got to go because there's going to be a 911 moment. In other words, a 9/11 moment where somebody's either going to try to throw me out or I'm going to punch them or something here is going to happen, right? I mean, because I promised my mother that I would expose her. I made that clear to Sacheen. Well, sorry, if it's got to be here, it's got to be here. And I went up and I was very peaceful. Some guy spoke before me for 20 minutes. It was so long and boring. What is hilarious in this whole thing is my sister Trudy wanted to sit in the front row. And I says, no, I want to sit in the back because I'm going to crash this thing. And I was just praying, trying to get strength. Well, I just happened to pick the seat that was in front of Bird Running Water and Heather Ray, who got busted for being a fake Indian 6 months after my sister. And he's what they call a defendian, right? He's Apache and Comanche. Well, these people are doing this to try to bolster their career. They're on the affiliation program or for the museum, whatever they call it. I mean, the whole thing's nuts. And so when I went up there and I'm looking at everybody and I'm saying, excuse me, we have no nieces, nephews, nothing. And I made it very clear by looking at Kalina Lawrence that you really, what nerve? I mean, what nerve? So, I mean, I was polite and short and factual. So guess who tries to escort me off the stage? The Catholic priest. The Catholic priest comes near me and I looked at him and I said, excuse me, I'm almost done before you try to throw me out.
Wow.
Right? Behind me, there was a picture of my sister with some lady combing her hair. Jacqueline had told me later, she goes, it's really weird because you put your hand up like this. That's what your sister did at the award. I didn't think about that. So I look at this priest, but this priest really bothered us because in the beginning of his sermon, he said, oh, and she was so abused. And we're like, are you kidding me? I mean, this is so insulting. They're putting my father down, our family down. These people don't know anything. They know a story. So I went up, I crashed it, and then we immediately left. Well, the next day, that article had already been ready to come out. And, today they come out on the internet. It hit at 4:00 in the morning. I couldn't even sleep. And all of a sudden it was just, it was blockbuster news everywhere. And I had everyone wanted to do an interview. One of the guys I think was great was Joshua Miller from the New York Post. He did a couple articles. I know there was Martha Ross from Bay Area News, Chickasaw journalist, Anthony Perry, who lives in the UK. I know Angela Elise, Farron Neiman, who are also Hollywood journalists.
So you had a group of people that were starting to get on your side, or at least sort of agree to look in this.
Right. We formed a team. Helene Hagen, she's a producer. I mean, we have throughout the years formed a team now. And even with Jacqueline Keeler and some other people, Kim Tallbear was great. I didn't even know who this woman was. She said to me on a email, I think through Twitter or something, she said, Rosalind, these defendians, they will realize over time that they were duped, and they will quietly stop defending your sister. But they will never apologize for slandering you. And it stuck with me. I thought, that's interesting. And then I thought about it later. I thought, no, when they quietly stop defending her, then they've apologized to me. They don't need to do it. So the people out there who kind of believe that she's, still Indian are very, very, very small, and you're going to get the same thing with Buffy.
Right. So we're running out of time here. I do want to say, it's, first of all, I'm always struck by the fact that the craziest, wildest part of this entire story is not the very famous wild, crazy incident at the Oscars, which is a famous incident and was wild and crazy, but everything else is much more. I mean, I'm sorry to be throwing around this word crazy, but obviously just as a word, we kind of it gets a lot of meanings, but
it's crazy.
But obviously for you, the most personal and intense thing. And I would, obviously so frustrating and heartbreaking. And obviously I'm so sorry with what happened with your mother and with your family being basically dragged through the mud all these years. My last question, and we'll be brief on it, is just now that you have transitioned into this phase where you're letting people know what happened for really, how your sister really was, your story. How do you feel? Does this help at all? Or is this just sort of like, it's the least you can do? Is it therapeutic?
No, this is wonderful. I mean, I had an interview with Jacqueline Keeler on Patreon a couple days ago, and I finally got to tell my story. I'm defending my family's legacy and my father's good name, and I feel justice has been served. And as far as my sister doing anything good that people think, no, she didn't do anything good. What she did was confuse and throw a lot of lies out to Native American people who were trying to connect. She fed them a lie and they believed it. And there's a lot of hurt people out there. Me, on the
Yeah.
other hand, I was just some innocent person that was trying to defend their family, and I walked into a whole scene I knew nothing about. However, I've had a lot of Native American people tell me, you broke the levee. You made it happen so the rest of us that have been trying to get this out could be recognized. And they just had a big conference now in Minnesota, and they're meeting face to face instead of doing Zoom. So this whole thing just broke. But you know what?
Okay.
You had to break Hollywood, and you had
Yeah.
to break them in order to get this thing going. And God works in mysterious ways, you know. Bring our family
Well, I'm
drama
glad we
to
could.
the family.
Yeah, I know. My
Take down
gosh.
the academy, and
Oh, man.
everything else falls into place.
Well, I'm glad we could be a part of, finding a place for you to tell your story. Obviously, it's a fascinating and tragic and remarkable story. And I hope that people see this. If people have questions or want to, get in touch with you or want to hear more, is there a place we should point them to?
Yeah, you can go on to my X account, which is at Truth Justice NW. I have a little envelope up there, so you can send me a personal message too.
Okay, great.
So that's where I'm
well-
at. I got a picture of my father and a picture of us as kids.
Oh, okay. I love that. Well, thank you so much, Rosalind Cruz. This has been
All right,
amazing.
thank you.
It's an incredible story. Thank you for sharing it with us. I know it's not easy to talk about things that are so intensely personal and tragic, and I appreciate you being candid and telling your story.
All right. Thank you.